the desert wind whispers through an open tomb, carrying with it the dust of forgotten kings and the faint scent of ancient resin. A flickering torchlight dances across the walls, revealing painted eyes that seem to watch the intruder from every angle. These are not mere decorations, they are guardians, symbols of a civilization obsessed with the one thing no human has ever conquered: death. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end but a crossing, a perilous journey that demanded preparation far beyond the physical. Every line of text, every carved sigil, every whispered spell was an act of rebellion against the final silence. Imagine standing in the Valley of the Kings at midnight. The stars above mirror the hieroglyphs carved into the rock below, both maps to eternity. Beneath your feet lie labyrinths of chambers built not to honor life, but to deceive death. Gold, food, perfumes, and prayers were offered not to the living gods, but to the dead who dreamed of becoming divine. To the Egyptians, mortality was a flaw, a condition to be cured through devotion, ritual, and forbidden words. Within this mindset, magic was not superstition, it was science, a cosmic technology designed to bend the laws of existence itself. Their priests were more than holy men. They were engineers of the soul, architects of immortality. Their knowledge was drawn from scrolls now lost, texts written in sacred ink that claimed to open the gates of heaven or summon the guardians of the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. These were no ordinary prayers. They were instructions, precise, poetic, and perilous. One misplaced word could condemn a soul to eternal darkness. Yet, to those who dared, these spells promised the unthinkable, a life beyond decay, a body that would not rot, and a consciousness that would awaken in the next world with memory intact. The civilization of the Nile lived with death in plain sight. Each flood, each harvest, each burial was a reminder that life and death were not enemies but reflections of one another. Their gods died and were reborn with the seasons. Their pharaohs followed the same divine pattern. To die was to transform, but only if one knew the way. The Book of the Dead was not a single book but a collection of spells, evolving over centuries, each verse a code to guide the soul through obstacles after death. But hidden beneath these official texts were others, whispered, secret, forbidden. They were not meant for the public or even for the priests. They were meant for those who sought to challenge the divine order, who wished not just to live after death, but to control it. Legends tell of tombs sealed not just to keep robbers out, but to keep spirits in. Within these sealed chambers, inscriptions in red ochre, called the words of fire, were scrawled on walls and coffins. These were forbidden spells, written by hands that trembled with both faith and fear. They promised resurrection, but they demanded sacrifice. Some were said to require a drop of human blood to activate. Others could only be recited under the new moon, when the boundary between worlds thinned. The Egyptians believed that to speak these words was to command reality itself, to awaken the gods or to defy them. Yet beneath the grandeur and gold was a haunting vulnerability. Their obsession with immortality was born not from arrogance but from terror, the terror of being forgotten. In their worldview, a man died twice, once when his body stopped breathing, and again when his name was spoken for the last time. That fear fueled their need to be remembered, to preserve their likeness in stone and to inscribe their names on every wall. To them, remembrance was resurrection. And the forbidden spells, those darker texts buried with their dead, were their last desperate attempt to ensure that they would never face the second death, the death of memory. Picture a priest, his face painted with sacred oils, standing alone in a dimly lit chamber deep beneath the sand. He chants softly, his voice echoing through stone halls that will never again see the sun. The words he speaks are not meant for mortal ears. They are promises and threats, love letters to gods and warnings to death itself. He believes, as all Egyptians did, that if the heart remains pure and the rituals are perfect, the soul will awaken in a body of light and cross into eternity. But he also knows that if he missteps, if the gods deem him unworthy, his soul will dissolve into chaos forever. The ancient Egyptians lived in a world where the sacred and the sinister were inseparable. To them, magic was a divine right and a mortal risk. They didn't see their spells as evil or blasphemous. They saw them as essential, the ultimate test of will against oblivion. And so they wrote, they chanted, they sealed their words in stone, believing that one day, someone might find them and understand. Now, as archaeologists unearth their tombs and scholars translate their papyri, we realize that these forbidden spells were more than myth. They were humanity's earliest attempt to program eternity, to craft a code so powerful that even death would obey. And though millennia have passed, their whispers still echo beneath the sands of Egypt, waiting for a voice brave, or foolish, enough to speak them aloud once more. Beneath the blazing Egyptian sun, death was never seen as an ending. It was a departure into a vast and perilous realm known as the Duat, the kingdom of the dead. To the ancient Egyptians, the afterlife was not a paradise freely given. It was a maze of judgment, danger, and deception. Every soul that entered it faced an odyssey through nightmarish landscapes, filled with gates guarded by serpents, lakes of fire, and beings who could devour a man's spirit in an instant. The living could only prepare by arming themselves with sacred knowledge, spells, names, and secret words of power. Without them, even a king could be lost forever in the eternal night. The Duat was not a single place but a series of worlds within worlds, each governed by gods and spirits who tested the worth of every traveler. In life, Egypt was ruled by Pharaoh. In death, it was ruled by balance, the eternal law of Ma'at. Every lie told, every sin committed, every act of selfishness tipped the scales of the soul. At the end of the journey stood Osiris, Lord of the dead, seated before the scales of judgment. The heart of the deceased was placed on one side, the feather of Ma'at on the other. If the heart was heavy with guilt, it was fed to Amit, the devourer of souls, a creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the haunches of a hippopotamus. For those who failed, there was no heaven, no reincarnation, no peace. There was only eternal erasure. To survive such a trial, Egyptians sought every possible defense. They called upon scribes and priests to write spells onto papyrus and linen, tucking them between bandages or painting them on the walls of their tombs. These were not prayers to be recited aloud, they were passwords, codes to unlock each gate of the underworld. Every stage of the journey demanded a response. "Who are you?" a guardian would ask. The soul had to know the secret name of the gatekeeper and recite it perfectly. One mistake, one forgotten word, and the path would vanish, leaving the spirit to wander in darkness. The most famous of these collections was the Book of the Dead, though to the Egyptians it was called the Book of Coming Forth by Day. It was both a map and a weapon, a spiritual guidebook written to outwit the terrors that awaited. But not all versions were the same. The texts were tailored to their owners, pharaohs, nobles, or commoners who could afford such luxuries. Each added or removed spells according to personal fears. Some wanted protection from snakes or demons, others wanted assurance that their hearts would not betray them at the final judgment. And yet, among these variations, a pattern emerged. The more one feared, the more one sought control, and that control often required forbidden magic. Beneath the official prayers of the temples lay another layer of ritual, darker, more ambitious, and more dangerous. In hidden chambers of Thebes and Memphis, priests whispered of spells not sanctioned by the state religion, words so powerful they could force passage through the Duat without judgment. These were the forbidden spells, recorded in red ink to mark their peril. They claimed to open the gates of the underworld by command, to silence the guardians, or even to bribe the gods themselves. Some texts described offerings of blood and honey, others the binding of sacred animals to draw divine attention. These rites promised a direct route to eternal life, but at a cost that few dared to imagine. Imagine a nobleman, terrified of the judgment to come. He visits a temple under the cover of darkness, carrying gold for the priests who will prepare his tomb. But instead of reciting the holy hymns of Osiris, they chant verses from a forbidden scroll, lines that twist and burn the air as they are spoken. The priests believe that by invoking secret names of the gods, they can bypass the scales entirely. The man's body is wrapped in fine linen, his amulets placed carefully on his chest, but within his wrappings are words that the gods themselves had forbidden, words meant to deceive eternity. The priests seal the tomb in silence, praying that no divine eye ever reads what they have written. The Egyptians viewed the afterlife as a mirror of their earthly world, structured, ordered, and ruled by hierarchy. Just as the Nile flowed through their land, a river of souls flowed through the Duat, connecting life and death. The sun god Ra was believed to travel through this underworld every night, battling chaos and emerging reborn at dawn. In this eternal cycle, life and death were inseparable, yet every Egyptian feared the chaos that lurked between them. The forbidden spells, then, were not acts of rebellion, they were acts of desperation. Each spell was a plea, let me follow the sun. Let me rise again. But not all spells were written to save the soul. Some were crafted to destroy enemies even after death. Among the most chilling were the execration texts, where clay figures were inscribed with the names of foes and smashed to curse them for eternity. To an Egyptian mind, this was justice. To deny one's enemy peace in the afterlife was to erase them from the cosmos. Death was not the great equalizer, it was the continuation of power. The pharaohs, believing themselves divine, ordered tombs filled with inscriptions declaring eternal dominance over friend and foe alike. Even in death, they sought to rule. As centuries passed, the underworld grew more complex in the Egyptian imagination. New spells were written to navigate an ever-expanding cosmology. By the time of the New Kingdom, the Amjuat, that which is in the underworld, emerged, depicting 12 gates corresponding to the 12 hours of night. Each gate was guarded by monsters whose names had to be known to pass. To memorize these names was to arm oneself for eternity. For those who couldn't afford such knowledge, the afterlife was a lottery. But for the elite, it became an obsession to customize the afterlife, to purchase eternity word by word, spell by spell. It is easy to romanticize this obsession today, to see the Egyptian afterlife as a glorious paradise of golden fields and endless light. But for them, it was a place of terror and uncertainty, where every wrong word could mean annihilation. The beauty of their tombs and temples hides a profound anxiety, a fear that even in death, the soul might fail. Their faith was not blind, it was a calculated gamble against oblivion. Every offering, every ritual, every forbidden spell was a move in a cosmic game whose stakes were eternal. And so, when we walk through their tombs today, gazing upon the bright paintings and delicate hieroglyphs, we are not merely looking at art. We are walking through maps of fear. Each line, each symbol, was drawn to guide a trembling soul through the darkness. The Duat was a kingdom built from hope and terror, a mirror of the Egyptian psyche where beauty and horror intertwined. In that fragile balance between faith and fear, between worship and defiance, lies the truth of the Egyptian obsession with death. They were not simply worshipping gods, they were negotiating with them. And within those negotiations, the most forbidden spells of all were born, spells that dared to promise what no god had ever granted freely, a life beyond death, without judgment, without end. In the dim silence of the embalming chamber, the air was heavy with incense and fear. The scent of cedar oil, myrrh, and rotting flesh mingled together in a sacred paradox, decay in the service of eternity. Here, among the whispering priests and flickering lamps, Egypt's most secret science unfolded, the preservation of the flesh, the eternal shell that the soul would one day reign habit. The Egyptians believed the body was not a corpse, it was a vessel, a house built for two lives. Destroy it, and the spirit would be homeless, condemned to wander the dark corridors of the Duat forever. To keep the body intact was not vanity, it was salvation. The process began with the purification of the dead, a ritual both intimate and horrifying. The embalmers washed the body in water drawn from the Nile, the same river believed to carry the essence of life. They whispered prayers as they touched the skin, asking Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification, to guide their hands. The internal organs were carefully removed, lungs, liver, stomach, intestines, each placed in a canopic jar guarded by a protective deity. Only the heart remained, for it was the seat of the soul and the key to judgment. The brain, useless in the afterlife, was drawn out through the nostrils with a bronze hook and discarded like waste. Every step was ritual. Every incision was sacred. But within the official rites, there existed other practices, whispered among the high priests, hidden from temple records. These were the forbidden preservations, rituals meant not just to preserve the body but to prepare it for resurrection. Some texts, long lost but referenced in later writings, speak of red oils and secret powders that could reanimate tissue or keep it supple for centuries. Ancient accounts describe priests who mixed human blood with tree resin, believing it contained the divine spark of vitality. Others used mercury and crushed gold, convinced that these substances held the energy of the gods. Imagine the dim glow of a single flame flickering across a corpse wrapped in linen. The priest murmurs a chant from the Book of Breathing, calling the soul to return to its vessel. He anoints the eyes with sacred oil, places amulets of carnelian and lapis lazuli across the chest, and whispers the forbidden words, spells that promise the body will not rot, that the skin will remain smooth, that the flesh will feel life once more. For the Egyptians, the physical form was not merely symbolic, it was the foundation of immortality. Without a perfect body, there could be no perfect rebirth. The body, they believed, was one of the 7 parts of the soul, the ka. The others, like the ka, life force, and ba, personality, could only function if their physical counterpart remained unbroken. This was why tombs were built like fortresses. Stone was chosen not for beauty but for endurance. Walls were painted not for decoration but as magical substitutes for reality. If the body failed, the images on the wall could sustain the soul. But the most powerful guarantee of all was the spell, inscribed directly onto the wrappings, whispered during embalming, or sealed inside the coffin lid. Each spell was a command to the flesh: do not decay, do not dissolve, live forever. One such incantation, found on fragments of a funerary papyrus, begins with a plea: "O my body, do not fall into corruption. Let no worms devour you. Let the divine fire renew your limbs." These words were not metaphor. The Egyptians believed they could halt decay through divine speech, spoken language infused with Heka, the magical energy that sustained creation itself. To speak was to create, to command was to transform. Thus, when a priest pronounced the forbidden words, he was not praying, he was performing surgery on the cosmos. But the preservation of the body was not always pure or peaceful. Some scholars and ancient travelers wrote of darker practices: mummifiers who experimented with human remains, nobles who demanded their servants be killed and buried alongside them so their souls might serve forever. In some cases, slaves were poisoned or suffocated to ensure their bodies remained intact for burial. To an Egyptian mind, this was not cruelty, it was loyalty beyond death. And for those who could afford it, the process was exquisite. Bodies were dried in natron salts for 70 days, painted with sacred ointments, wrapped in hundreds of meters of linen, and decorated with golden masks, faces meant to deceive both men and gods. Still, the priests knew that flesh was fragile, and time was relentless. For this reason, the most elite burials included substitute bodies, small statues known as ushabtis, infused with magic to act as backups should the real body fail. They were inscribed with spells commanding them to awaken and work in the fields of paradise on behalf of their master. It was, in a sense, an early form of cloning, a belief that one's essence could be multiplied, ensuring existence even if decay triumphed. Yet, beneath this ingenious system lay an obsession that bordered on madness, a refusal to let go of the body, a denial of death so complete it verged on blasphemy. Some tombs reveal even more disturbing evidence of this obsession. Certain mummies, when unwrapped, were found to contain extra layers of resin and amulets shaped like hearts, eyes, or genitalia, symbols of divine regeneration. These were not symbolic gestures but magical prosthetics, intended to restore missing parts for the afterlife. A dismembered limb or damaged organ could mean eternal paralysis of the soul. Thus, priests took no chances. Every finger was wrapped individually. Every toe was bound. Even the tongue was coated in gold foil to ensure the deceased could speak the words of resurrection before Osiris. Gold, to the Egyptians, was the flesh of the gods, eternal, untarnished, indestructible. It is said that in certain secret rituals, known only to the highest temple initiates, the embalming priests invoked the ritual of breath. Using the sacred ankh, the symbol of life, they would touch the lips of the mummy and speak the opening of the mouth ceremony. This was the climactic moment, the reanimation of the body's senses. May your eyes open to the light. May your heart beat again. May your mouth speak the words of eternity. These lines, carved in hieroglyphs, were not poetry, they were instructions to the soul to find its home once more. For those who witnessed it, the sight must have been both beautiful and terrifying, a lifeless figure, restored to divine dignity by human hands. Yet, for all its sanctity, embalming was also a business, and not every ritual followed divine law. In some cases, families paid extra for special treatments that promised immortality beyond even what the gods decreed. Rumors spread of secret oils made from forbidden ingredients, extracts of sacred ibis, crocodile fat, or the flesh of unholy animals. These mixtures were whispered to delay decay indefinitely. Whether superstition or chemistry, some mummies remain astonishingly intact even today, their skin smooth, their features eerily lifelike, their eyes seemingly watching across millennia. The Egyptian obsession with preserving the body was rooted in both faith and fear. Faith in rebirth, fear of annihilation. They believed that to decay was to vanish, to lose the bridge between the worlds. Each ritual, each forbidden spell, each delicate wrapping of linen was an act of defiance, a statement against entropy. The priests who performed these rites were not merely caretakers of the dead, they were guardians of eternity, holding back the unstoppable tide of time with words and wax and will. And though thousands of years have passed, their success still speaks. The bodies of their kings remain, neither living nor dead, suspended in the silence of eternity. Their flesh, preserved through forbidden science and sacred speech, whispers the same promise that haunted every Egyptian heart. The body may sleep, but it shall awaken again. In ancient Egypt, names were far more than labels. They were fragments of the soul, threads of power that tied the mortal body to divine eternity. To speak a name was to breathe life into existence. To erase it was to kill a person twice, once in body and again in spirit. The Egyptians called this the Ren, the sacred name that defined who a person was in both worlds. Without it, even the most powerful pharaoh would be nothing more than dust and silence. It was through this understanding that some of the most forbidden spells in Egyptian magic were born, spells of naming, of erasure, and of resurrection. Every Egyptian carried within them multiple souls, and the Ren was among the most vital. Unlike the Ka or Ba, which represented energy and personality, the Ren existed in language. It was the vibration that anchored being itself. The name was immortal so long as it was remembered, spoken, or written. This is why pharaohs built monuments taller than mountains and carved their names deep into temple walls. Their goal was not vanity, it was survival. For as long as someone uttered Ramesses, Akhenaten, or Cleopatra, their essence continued to live in the world. But when an enemy wanted true vengeance, they didn't just kill the body, they destroyed the name. This act, called damnatio memoriae, was not unique to Egypt, but the Egyptians gave it divine gravity. Chiseling a name from a tomb or erasing it from papyrus condemned the soul to oblivion. The person's Ren would no longer be recognized by the gods, their spirit lost in the void, unable to enter the fields of reeds, the eternal paradise. The Egyptians feared this second death more than any earthly punishment. To live forever, one needed not only the preservation of the body but also the preservation of the name. And so, they created spells that could protect, conceal, or even restore the Ren once it had been stolen or cursed. Among these sacred texts were the spells of the hidden name. These incantations were designed to disguise one's true identity from demons or jealous spirits who sought to destroy it. Some versions, carved on the inner walls of coffins, begin with words like, "My name is not known to you, it is hidden within Ra, eternal and unseen." To hide one's name was to hide one's soul, to slip unseen through the dangerous passages of the afterlife. Yet, as always in Egypt, knowledge could be turned from protection to power. What began as defense became weapon. The same spells that concealed names could also reveal them, and once a name was known, it could be used to command or curse. One of the most chilling legends speaks of Isis and Ra. The great sun god, creator of all things, grew old, and his saliva dripped upon the earth. From it, Isis, goddess of magic, created a serpent that bit him. Poisoned and in agony, Ra could not heal himself. Isis approached, promising to cure him if he revealed his secret name, the true, hidden word that gave him power over all creation. Ra resisted, for even gods feared the theft of their names. But the pain grew unbearable, and at last, he whispered it to her. In that moment, Isis became the most powerful being in the cosmos, her magic surpassing even the sun gods. This myth was not just a story, it was a warning. To know a name was to control destiny itself. From this divine mythology emerged real, human rituals of name magic. Priests and magicians crafted amulets inscribed with the secret names of gods and demons. These were buried with the dead or worn in life as protection. Others, darker still, used name spells for vengeance. Clay figurines were made in the image of one's enemy, their names carved into the surface. The magician would recite curses over the figure, spit upon it, burn it, or smash it to pieces, believing that whatever was done to the effigy would happen to the person's soul. Archaeologists have unearthed hundreds of these execration figures, many with names still legible, their faces shattered by ancient hands. But there were other, even more forbidden uses of name spells, those meant to summon or resurrect. Some papyri, kept hidden by temple initiates, describe rituals where the name of the deceased was called 3 times at midnight, accompanied by the burning of sacred herbs and the pouring of milk upon the ground. It was said that if performed correctly, the Ba of the dead would return, hovering above the body like a bird of fire. Whether this was meant for communication or resurrection remains unclear, but the idea itself reveals a dangerous truth. The Egyptians believed words could bridge the gap between life and death. Language was not description, it was creation. There is an ancient inscription found in the tomb of Seti I that reads, "My name is a flame that burns in the afterlife. Let none extinguish it." This was not metaphor, it was metaphysics. To preserve the name was to ensure the immortality of the self. This belief extended even into their architecture. The walls of pyramids and temples were not mere decoration, they were vessels of memory. Every hieroglyph was a prayer, every repetition of a name a heartbeat in eternity. But the inverse was just as potent. To deface a cartouche, to scratch away a single glyph, was to suffocate a soul. Perhaps the most infamous example is that of Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who defied Egypt's pantheon by worshipping a single god, Aten. After his death, his successors sought to erase him completely. His statues were destroyed, his temples dismantled, his name chiseled off every monument. His run was erased from history. And yet, in doing so, they fulfilled his dream in reverse. He became immortal, not as a god, but as a ghost, remembered not by worship, but by forbidden memory. To erase a name entirely was nearly impossible. The attempt itself became a form of resurrection. There were also personal name spells, intimate and emotional. Lovers carved each other's names into charms or wrote them in secret places, believing this bound their souls across lifetimes. Some texts even describe rituals for the dead to call their living partners in dreams, whispering their names through the veil of the duet. Such acts blurred the line between devotion and obsession. To summon a name was to summon a presence, and sometimes that presence did not wish to return. In the dim chambers of the tombs, where walls glimmered with gold and obsidian, names were inscribed everywhere, on sarcophagi, amulets, even on the wrappings of mummies. The Egyptians feared that if their names faded, they would fade too. So they repeated them endlessly, weaving them into spells that commanded the gods to remember. In one ancient spell, a priest cries out, "Remember my name. Say it before the throne of Osiris. Let my Ren live, and I shall live forever." It is both plea and command, a voice echoing across time. But the most haunting of all were the spells of erasure. Found in fragments of forbidden texts, these incantations invoked divine forces to consume an enemy's name, to wipe it from heaven and earth. The spell described a ritual involving the drowning of a written name in Nile water, symbolically suffocating the soul it belonged to. It was, in every sense, spiritual murder. The body might remain untouched, but the identity, the memory, the essence, was obliterated. To use such magic was to assume the role of a god, and that act itself was considered taboo, punishable by both divine wrath and eternal exile. To the Egyptians, the name was the bridge between flesh and eternity, between memory and oblivion. Every spoken syllable, every carved symbol, carried weight in the fabric of reality. And so they guarded their names as fiercely as their hearts, for to lose either was to lose existence itself. In their obsession with immortality, they created a world where words could kill, heal, or resurrect, where the power of language reached beyond the grave. Today, when we read the names carved into their monuments, when we whisper Tutankhamun or Nefertiti, we are unknowingly fulfilling their greatest spell, their plea to be remembered. Every time their names pass human lips, their souls stir once more in the eternal night of the duet. The Egyptians achieved what they feared they would lose, a kind of immortality through memory, secured by the very magic they once called forbidden. There are few things more dangerous than a mortal seeking to command a god. Yet in ancient Egypt, the line between worship and control was perilously thin. For thousands of years, the Egyptians had lived in a world where the divine was not distant but interwoven with every grain of sand, every breath of wind, every drop of the Nile. The gods were not abstract. They were alive, listening, and ever-present. But what happens when faith becomes too intimate, when devotion turns to domination? Out of that tension arose one of the most perilous branches of Egyptian magic, the spells of control, rituals that promised not just communion with the gods, but mastery over them. To the Egyptians, magic, Heka, was not blasphemy. It was the raw energy of creation itself, the same force used by the gods to form the world from chaos. Humans did not invent Heka, they inherited it. Every priest, every magician, every pharaoh was believed to wield a fragment of this divine power. In their view, invoking a god's name or image was not an act of hubris, but of alignment, a merging of mortal and divine will. Yet somewhere in the shadowed corridors of the temples, that boundary blurred. What began as invocation evolved into coercion. Some priests learned not only to call upon the gods, but to bind them. At the heart of these forbidden rites were the so-called coercive spells, texts that threatened or manipulated gods to achieve the caster's desires. Found in fragments of the coffin texts and later magical papyri, they read more like ultimatums than prayers. One chilling example commands Osiris himself, "Come forth and grant me passage. If you do not, I shall set fire to your temples and strike your statues from the earth." Such words would have been unthinkable in public ritual, but in secret, whispered by candlelight, they represented the most desperate hope of the dying, the power to force eternity's gate open. The priests who performed these rites were not charlatans. They were scholars, philosophers, and alchemists of the spirit. Many were members of secret cults operating within temple walls, orders devoted to the study of the divine mechanisms of life and death. Their rituals were as complex as they were dangerous. They used circles of gold dust, jars of sacred water from the Nile, and effigies carved from sycamore wood. They believed that through correct recitation and symbolic offering, the gods could be compelled, bound by the very laws they had written into existence. It was not so much rebellion as it was negotiation at the edge of blasphemy. One of the most powerful examples of these control spells can be traced to the Book of the Dead, spell number 17, which declares, "I am he who commands the gods, who knows the secret paths of the sky." Scholars have long debated whether this was metaphor or heresy. To claim command over gods was to claim equality with them, a dangerous ambition. And yet, for the Egyptians, divinity was not unreachable. Every human being in death hoped to join the gods, to become Ak, a radiant being of light. In that pursuit, the boundary between prayer and demand became dangerously porous. It is said that the most daring priests used Heka to summon deities into material form. Within hidden chambers of Karnak and Abydos, they invoked the spirits of Ra or Thoth into statues, believing the divine essence could be trapped within crafted images. Offerings of wine, honey, and blood were placed before these figures. The priests would whisper sacred words into the statue's ear, commands masked as worship. The ritual ended with the sealing of the god's essence inside the image, transforming it into a vessel of both faith and power. These enchanted statues were then used to grant prophecies, heal the sick, or deliver curses. But such acts came at great risk. To control a god, even for a moment, was to invite cosmic retribution. One ancient papyrus, preserved in fragments at the British Museum, describes a ritual known as the binding of Ra. It begins with the invocation of the sun god's 77 secret names, each one a key to his essence. The magician was instructed to recite them in a specific order, drawing a circle around himself while burning cedar resin. As the air thickened with smoke, the priest would hold up a figure of the sun disk bound in red string and command, "By your names, I bind you, or to my will." The spell's final line warns, "Speak not unless you can bear the weight of the heavens upon your back." To misuse this ritual, it was said, was to invite madness or death. These spells were not confined to the elite. In later periods, as Egypt came under Greek and Roman influence, temple secrets began to leak into the hands of common magicians and healers. Magical papyri from this era describe ordinary people using divine coercion in love spells, healing incantations, and revenge rituals. A woman might command Hathor, goddess of love, to strike the heart of a distant lover. A grieving mother might invoke Isis to restore a dead child to her arms. The formulas were often written in both Egyptian and Greek, blending faiths into something new and increasingly volatile. What was once sacred became a tool for personal power. The paradox was clear. The same gods who ruled over death could be threatened by mortals who understood their true names. This belief transformed Egypt's spirituality into something both intimate and terrifying. Faith was no longer surrender, it was leverage. To the Egyptian magician, the divine world was not unreachable heaven, but a vast bureaucracy that could be bribed, threatened, or outsmarted. The rituals mirrored the politics of their earthly world, where priests and kings negotiated constantly for dominance. The afterlife was simply another court to manipulate. Some of the most forbidden texts of all were said to be those that granted the magician authority to replace the gods entirely, to ascend into their roles. The Book of Thoth, now lost but often referenced in legend, was said to contain such formulas. Its pages allegedly held the power to control the moon and stars, to speak with animals, and to raise the dead. But its possession was cursed. According to legend, a prince once discovered the book buried in a tomb beneath the Nile. When he read its words aloud, he was granted immense power, but the gods, enraged, destroyed his family and cursed his soul to wander the Duat forever. The lesson was clear: the knowledge of gods belonged only to gods. And yet, despite the danger, the human hunger for power endured. In a world ruled by death, the idea of commanding life, even divine life, was irresistible. To recite a forbidden spell was to reach beyond mortality, to grasp the very architecture of existence. The priests who performed such acts believed they were not defying the gods, but fulfilling them, using Heka as the gods had intended, to maintain balance in a chaotic universe. But others saw these acts for what they were: trespasses into sacred territory, where even a whisper could tip the scales of eternity. The Egyptians lived by a delicate equation of reverence and rebellion. Their gods were both protectors and prisoners, creators and captives. The forbidden spells of control embodied that paradox: half prayer, half threat, half worship, half warfare. To the priests who risked their souls, it was the ultimate expression of devotion, to love their gods so deeply they dared to command them. To us, it stands as a haunting reflection of the human condition, the eternal desire not just to understand the divine, but to become it. And perhaps that was always the secret Egypt tried to hide, that the boundary between God and man was never meant to be fixed. It was meant to be crossed. Death in ancient Egypt was not a single moment. It was a landscape, a labyrinth, a perilous journey across the night sky and through the hidden tunnels of the Duat, the underworld. To the Egyptians, dying was like entering a vast cosmic courtroom, where the soul would be tested, questioned, judged, and either reborn or erased. Every man, woman, and child would one day face this crossing. And for those who feared its dangers, the priests crafted a series of spells so potent, so secret, that they promised safe passage through the very jaws of eternity. These were the spells of protection, a sacred arsenal of words designed to shield the soul from annihilation. The Egyptians believed that the afterlife was not peaceful by default. It had to be earned. When the body died, the spirit fragmented into several parts: the Ka, life force; the Ba, personality or soul bird; and the Ak, the transfigured, immortal spirit. These parts had to find one another again in the afterlife. But between life and reunion lay chaos, the realm of serpents, fire lakes, and monstrous guardians. Every step of the journey demanded a response: an incantation, a password, or a ritual defense. Without these, the soul would be devoured by the serpent Apophis or trapped forever in the caverns of night. The protection spells were more than prayers, they were maps through hell. Imagine a newly departed spirit, freshly separated from its body, standing before the gates of the Duat. The air hums with power, rivers of flame and shadow twist through caverns of bone. The walls shimmer with hieroglyphs that move like living creatures. Every gate is guarded by demons with impossible forms, half human, half animal, crowned with serpents or knives. Each guardian demands a secret name, a coded phrase known only to the initiated. To pass safely, the soul must remember every line of the spells inscribed on its coffin or papyrus scroll. These words were not symbolic. They were keys. Speak them correctly, and the gates open. Stumble, hesitate, forget, and the journey ends in silence. One of the oldest and most feared protection texts was the spell for repelling the devourer of souls. It described the creature Amit, part lion, part crocodile, part hippopotamus, who waited beside the scales of judgment. When a heart weighed heavier than the feather of Ma'at, goddess of truth, Amit would consume it, erasing that person from existence. But certain priests believed that with the right incantation, even Amit could be deceived. A papyrus found at Saqqara describes a substitute heart spell, where the deceased recites, "My heart is pure, my heart is light. It shall not be taken from me." By speaking these words, the soul claimed innocence, regardless of its earthly sins. In other words, it was a magical loophole in divine justice, a spell to cheat the gods. The Egyptians were masters of spiritual engineering. They constructed not only physical tombs but metaphysical fortresses, layered systems of protection built through text, symbol, and ritual. Coffins were lined with spells to guard against serpents and fire. Amulets shaped like scarabs were placed over the heart to ensure it would not betray the soul during judgment. The Eye of Horus was painted on walls and worn as jewelry to deflect the gaze of evil. Every object, every word, every gesture had purpose. In their worldview, safety was not found in faith alone but in preparation. Death was an exam, and only the well-studied would pass. Among the most extraordinary of these protective spells were the ones that promised resurrection in a physical sense. The Book of Breathing, often buried with priests and nobles during the late period, contained passages that instructed the soul to inhale divine air from the nostrils of Osiris. To breathe, in Egyptian belief, was to live again. By reciting these words, the deceased claimed the breath of life itself. "May I breathe the air that comes from your nose, O Osiris, that I may live again." It was an act of sacred mimicry, drawing vitality directly from the god of resurrection. These spells blurred the line between spiritual safety and bodily immortality. But protection in the afterlife was never only defense, it was also warfare. One of the most fearsome rituals ever recorded was the overthrowing of Apophis, the great serpent of chaos. Every night, priests gathered to perform a reenactment of the cosmic battle between Ra, the sun god, and Apophis, who sought to devour the sun before dawn. The priests crafted wax effigies of the serpent, inscribed his name upon them, spat upon them, hacked them to pieces, and burned them while reciting curse formulas. These spells were not metaphorical. They were believed to literally wound the cosmic enemy. Each time the priest succeeded, Ra was reborn, and dawn returned to the world. The same logic was applied to the dead. By reciting these words, the deceased joined the gods in their eternal struggle against darkness, ensuring their own rebirth alongside the rising sun. The Amjuat, another funerary text used by pharaohs, went even further. It served as both a map and a weapon, a step-by-step guide through the 12 hours of night. Each hour contained monstrous beings, rivers of fire, and hidden gates that could only be opened by specific incantations. The spells often took the form of commands, such as, "Begone, eater of shadows. I am the flame of Ara." The deceased was trained not to beg for mercy but to assert dominance, to speak as a god among gods. To survive the duet, one had to become part of its machinery, to claim divine authority through perfect recitation. These protection spells reflected a profound psychological truth. The Egyptians did not see fear as weakness but as a force to be mastered. To name one's terror was to control it. To speak against the darkness was to light a flame within it. Their magic was not simply about power, it was about self-transformation. In death, as in life, words shaped reality. The very act of speaking protection became an act of creation, a reaffirmation of the order, Ma'at, that held the universe together. However, not all protective magic was benevolent. Some texts describe rituals that bordered on cruelty. To secure one's own safety, a magician might offer the soul of another as substitution, sacrificing a lesser spirit to satisfy the guardians of the afterlife. A particularly chilling example comes from a fragment known as the spell of the burning substitute. It instructs the deceased to fashion a clay figure of an enemy, inscribe their name upon it, and burn it before burial. The fire would consume the substitute's soul in place of the caster's. As he burns, the text says, "So shall I be freed." Protection, in this sense, was not innocent. It was survival through sacrifice. These darker versions of the spells reveal a haunting duality within Egyptian belief. Protection and aggression, life and death, mercy and cruelty, all coexisted within the same spiritual framework. Their concept of safety was inseparable from domination over chaos. To protect oneself was to subdue others, whether demons, serpents, or even rival souls. Every spell was both a shield and a weapon. And behind that duality lay an unspoken fear, that the universe was not as stable as it seemed, and that even the gods themselves could fail. The priests who guarded these texts understood their power all too well. Some refused to copy certain spells, fearing that the unworthy might misuse them. Others buried their scrolls with their own bodies, believing that if the words were spoken by impure lips, they would bring catastrophe instead of salvation. These were not just religious formulas, they were volatile, living entities. The Egyptians believed that when a spell was read aloud, it became real, inhabiting the world like a spirit. To speak protection was to summon it into existence. In the end, the protection spells of ancient Egypt tell a story far deeper than fear of death. They reveal a civilization obsessed with mastery, over nature, over chaos, over mortality itself. They saw the afterlife not as rest but as conquest. To them, eternal peace was not granted, it was earned through struggle, intellect, and unshakable will. Each word of power carved into a tomb wall was a defiant whisper against the inevitable. I will not disappear. I will not die. And even now, thousands of years later, their voices remain. In the silence of their tombs, the protective spells still gleam faintly beneath torchlight, prayers turned into weapons, words carved into eternity. The Egyptians may have feared death, but they never surrendered to it. They fought it with ink, with faith, and with fire, and in doing so, they built an empire that refused to die. There comes a point in every ancient Egyptian's journey through death when faith alone is not enough. The protective spells, the sacred amulets, the careful mummification, none of it mattered if the soul could not be reborn. For to survive eternity was not simply to escape destruction, it was to transform. This was the promise of the spells of resurrection, the most sacred and forbidden texts of all. They did not beg for mercy or ask for guidance. They demanded rebirth. They called upon the very forces of the cosmos to restore the flesh, reawaken the heart, and unite the soul with the divine. To speak them was to play God, to invoke the same creative powers that once summoned the world from chaos. The idea of resurrection lay at the core of Egyptian belief. The entire civilization revolved around the myth of Osiris, the god who was killed, dismembered, and resurrected by the love and magic of his wife, Isis. Every Egyptian funeral was, in essence, a reenactment of that myth. The deceased was transformed into the Osiris of name, symbolically becoming the god of resurrection himself. But Osiris's story was more than allegory, it was a ritual template. Isis's magic, her words of awakening, became the model for a series of spells that promised to bring the dead back to life, not as mortals, but as divine beings. The priests who guarded these spells claimed that they had learned them from Isis herself. The resurrection spells were not simply prayers, they were commands, often addressed directly to the body. Awake, O limbs! Arise, O bones! Remember your shape, O flesh! Such lines appear in the pyramid texts, the oldest known religious writings in the world, carved into the tombs of the pharaohs more than 4,000 years ago. The words have a strange power even today, as though they were never meant to be read by the living. They describe a process that is both mystical and disturbingly physical, the reanimation of a corpse, piece by piece, guided by divine language. Your heart shall beat, your breath shall return, your eyes shall see the horizon of Ra. These were not metaphors for remembrance, they were literal instructions for resurrection. In the Egyptian worldview, words themselves carried the force of creation. The universe, they believed, began when the god Ptah spoke it into being. Thus, the proper utterance of sacred phrases could mirror that act, recreating life in miniature. The dead body was merely raw material, waiting for the divine spark. Priests would recite specific formulas over the mummy, touching each part of the body with ritual instruments, opening the mouth, anointing the limbs, tracing hieroglyphs of power across the chest. These were acts of divine imitation. They repeated the gestures of the gods during the rebirth of Osiris. Each motion was exact, every syllable measured. A single error could trap the soul in limbo forever. One of the most mysterious rites was the opening of the mouth ceremony, performed to restore the senses of the deceased. Using a sacred blade or adze, the priest would touch the mouth, eyes, and ears of the mummy while chanting, "May your mouth open so that you may speak, may your eyes open so that you may see the sun." It was believed that this act restored not only physical function but spiritual consciousness. In that moment, the soul could re-enter the body and speak once more. To modern eyes, it seems symbolic, but to the Egyptians, it was a literal resurrection, an awakening engineered through ritual precision and divine energy. Other texts went further still, describing full physical reassembly. The Book of the Dead, Spell 43 commands, "O my bones, grow together, O my limbs, be firm. I am alive, I am young again." In this, the Egyptians revealed a deep understanding of the relationship between the body and identity. The soul could not exist without its form. Immortality required embodiment. That is why their mummification was so elaborate. The body was preserved not for memory, but as a vessel for future return. Flesh, linen, resin, and gold were bound together into a sacred machine, a divine host waiting to be powered by the right words. Some of the most secret of resurrection spells were never written down at all. They were transmitted orally, passed from priest to priest in whispers. The high priests of Heliopolis, the cult center of Ra, were said to possess the words of becoming, a set of incantations capable of resurrecting the dead for one night under the light of the full moon. The ritual, according to later texts, involved the burning of incense made from myrrh, cedar, and human hair. The priest would draw the symbol of the sun upon the chest of the corpse and recite the formula 12 times, once for each hour of the night. The body would then stir, open its eyes, and speak briefly before collapsing again into silence. Whether this was superstition or something else entirely, it haunted Egyptian imagination for millennia. There were even more dangerous spells, those that promised not just resurrection, but transformation into something greater. In the coffin texts, spell 330 reads, "I am a falcon. I have ascended to the sky among the gods. I am reborn as the sun." Here, the soul abandons human form entirely, taking on the shape of divine beings. To achieve this, the magician had to merge his Ba, the soul, with the light of Ra, effectively becoming a celestial entity. This idea, that the human spirit could evolve into divine energy, was among the most radical in all of ancient religion. It suggested that with enough knowledge, faith, and magical skill, a human could surpass even death's dominion and become a god. The key to these transformations lay in the knowledge of true names. Every god, demon, and soul had a secret name, a vibration of divine power that defined its essence. To know and speak that name was to command the being itself. Thus, in many resurrection spells, the dead declared their knowledge of the gods' hidden names as proof of their worthiness to rise again. I know the secret name of the sky goddess Nut. I know the name of him whose bones are hidden. The Book of the Dead, spell 125, explicitly states that only those who know the gods by name can pass into eternal life. In this way, resurrection became not just a spiritual act but an intellectual conquest, the mastery of sacred language as the key to eternity. These spells were deeply psychological as well as theological. They reflected humanity's oldest obsession, the refusal to accept finality. To die was not to disappear, but to transition. To speak the right words was to reclaim control over one's fate. It is perhaps no coincidence that the Egyptian word for magic, Heka, also means the power to make effective. To resurrect oneself was to exercise that ultimate power, the victory of will over decay. Every resurrection spell was a confrontation with entropy, a declaration that consciousness could not be extinguished. Yet the Egyptians understood that resurrection came with a price. The texts are filled with warnings. Let none unworthy speak these words, for they shall burn in both worlds. To attempt resurrection without purity was to invite disaster, to become trapped between life and death, a wandering shade known as a mutt. Such souls, they believed, haunted the living, whispering their forbidden secrets in dreams. The line between salvation and damnation was razor-thin. The same spells that granted eternal life could also curse the speaker to eternal unrest. In the royal tombs, the resurrection spells were engraved not only on papyrus but directly onto the walls, thousands of hieroglyphs shimmering in gold and blue, illuminated by the flickering light of oil lamps. They formed a visual symphony of rebirth, scarabs, solar discs, lotus flowers opening at dawn. Every image was a spell, every word a command. These chambers were not graves but engines of transformation, designed to activate when the pharaoh's soul entered them. As the coffin was sealed, the priests recited the final formula. Rise, O Osiris, for you shall never die again. The doors closed, and the darkness became sacred. The spells of resurrection were more than religion, they were the ultimate rebellion against nature. They defied decay, time, and the very order of mortality. The Egyptians refused to accept the silence of death. They sought to rewrite its laws with ink and breath. And perhaps, in a sense, they succeeded. For even now, their names are spoken. Their words are read. Their tombs still pulse with quiet energy beneath the sand, their symbols still capable of stirring the imagination. In this way, their resurrection was real, not through flesh, but through memory. Every whisper from the tombs, every glyph carved in darkness, every spell preserved on brittle papyrus is proof that they achieved what they most desired, to live forever. In the Hall of Two Truths, Osiris weighed hearts against Ma'at's feather. Success meant eternal life, failure, Amit's jaws, obliteration. Egyptians recited forbidden spells to silence their conscience, deceive the scales, or even redirect guilt. Heart scarabs and amulets were placed to protect against divine judgment. Some rituals backfired, trapping souls in eternal unrest. Yet these spells reflected humanity's ambition, control over morality itself. Fear, cunning, and ritual intertwined as Egyptians challenged fate. Even in failure, the echo of their defiance endured. Every whispered word, every carved glyph was a rebellion against death, a desperate claim to survive eternity. Above the Nile, stars flickered like the souls who survived the duet. Countless others vanished into silence. The forbidden spells of life after death were humanity's first rebellion against oblivion, a desperate attempt to cheat mortality. Egyptians bent divine law with Heka, crafting tombs, amulets, and hieroglyphs as engines of immortality. Some spells failed, consuming the soul, others endured through memory. Today, we echo their magic, reading their words, marveling at their tombs, keeping them alive. In the end, their defiance persists across time. We have conquered death. Memory, like magic, became eternal.